Maybe you remember at the start of 2025, I made a video called the Digital XPan, where I introduced the concept of using an anamorphic lens to create cinematic looking photos with a super wide aspect ratio, similar to what you'd get when shooting with the legendary Hasselblad XPan. The concept wasn't groundbreaking or entirely new, but what was new was the fact that anamorphic lenses have become much smaller and lighter, at least some of them, and that makes them much more appealing for photography. Size and weight are no longer a major issue. However, a common downside has been that these lenses are typically manual focus only, at least until recently. Because now we finally have anamorphic lenses that support autofocus, like this one here. This is the SIRUI 20mm t1.8 lens. SIRUI was kind enough to send me this lens to try out, so thank you for that. Having anamorphic lenses that can do autofocus is great, but on this guy here, there's a catch. It's designed for APS-C size sensor, so you can use it in full frame as long as you can live with a little bit more vignetting and less controlled distortions around the edges. Just quickly, here are a few specs of this lens. The body is made of metal and weighs around 496 grams. That's roughly 1 pound. The filter size is 77mm. The aperture ring is declickable, which can be handy for video work, but you can also set it to auto and control it directly from the camera. It also features an autofocus manual focus switch and an AF hold button, which is a nice bonus. Manual focus is focus by wire with no hard stops. But I guess autofocus is the main selling point of this lens, so that's not a big issue. Now, what does it look like when you actually shoot this in full frame mode? And now I'm in full frame mode. As you can see, there's a little bit more vignetting, but actually shooting at t1.8 doesn't look that bad. It actually looks pretty cool if I look at the screen here. And if you shoot an event or something where it's beneficial to have such a wide lens, actually this could be really cool, and the vignetting and the distortion towards the edges, they don't matter that much anymore, and they can actually give the image a little bit more character. So yeah, actually I'm kind of liking it in full frame mode. Just recently I took this lens to a concert I knew would be packed to see how it performs in the real world. All the photos and the video footage were shot in full frame mode at t1.8 using autofocus on my Lumix S5 II. I have to say, I was really happy with the results, even though the conditions were quite challenging. You can't imagine how hot it was inside the venue. The raw files were edited in Lightroom, and the only extra step was de-squeezing the images in Photoshop. That was fairly easy. I created an action, so it was basically just one click per photo. When talking about de-squeezing, this lens here has a squeeze factor of 1.33. That means the resulting image will be stretched horizontally by 1.33 times. The result isn't as wide as an X-Pan shot, but on the upside, framing your photo in the viewfinder is much easier than with a squeeze factor of 1.6 or higher. When shooting video, my camera can preview the footage already de-squeezed, but that doesn't work for stills. And the higher the squeeze factor, the trickier it becomes to frame your shots, since everything looks so squished together. The green frame represents the aspect ratio of a photo taken with a Hasselblad XPan. On top of that, you can see a typical camera sensor with a 3:2 aspect ratio, standard for full frame and APS-C sensors. An anamorphic lens like this 20mm 1.33 times gives you a noticeably wider aspect ratio, but it's still not as wide as an XPan. To get closer, you'd need a 1.6 squeeze factor or even 1.8 to match it perfectly. But 1.8 lenses are usually quite bulky, and if you want autofocus, 1.33 times is your only option, at least for now. If you're wondering about how sharp this lens is, I'd say it's sharp enough. It's not clinically sharp, but that's not something I personally look for. For me, it's more important that the image has character, and in that regard, this lens truly delivers. One key aspect of the character is the lens flare. This lens comes in either a blue flare version or, like the one I'm using here, a neutral flare version. That means the flare will take on the color of the light source triggering it. But to actually get flaring, you need a strong light source pointing directly into the lens, as you can see here. And if you're curious about sunstars, here's what they look at f11, or sorry, t11. As you can see, lens flares are pretty prominent when a strong light source is pointed directly into the lens. One common limitation with anamorphic lenses is their poor close focusing ability. With many of them, the minimal focus distance is 90 centimeters or even more, which can be a real problem. Of course, you can use diopters to get closer, but let's be honest, no one really enjoys using them. Luckily, this 20mm has a minimum focus distance of 40 centimeters, and I think that is very usable. It's something a lot of Leica M shooters dream of when they use their cameras, and yeah, like on this 28 Summicron, 70 centimeters, not ideal. As you might know, I love street photography, but would I recommend this lens for that? Well, to be honest, for me personally, I think this lens is maybe a little bit too wide. But if you shoot it on an APS-C camera or an APS-C mode like I'm doing right now, it comes very close to my favorite lens on the Hasselblad XPan, which is the 30mm f5.6. So yeah, on APS-C, I really like this focal length, but on full frame, I think for me personally, it's a little bit too wide. I still wanted to try getting a few candid shots while waiting for my train. The first shot was actually taken in full frame mode, and the rest were in APS-C at t1.8 with autofocus. SIRUI also offers this lens in a 45mm version. It also has an aperture of t1.8 and also autofocus. But to be honest, that focal length isn't really for me, and the lens itself is a bit too chunky. For me, the 20mm t1.8 isn't the dream lens that I was hoping for, but that makes sense because 20mm is a little bit too wide for my personal liking. So for me, 30mm in a full frame version would be better, and I would be okay if that lens had 2.8 or maybe f4, and it would mean that the lens has a more compact design. So what's my final verdict? This lens is a great lens for what it is, and if you're shooting an APS-C camera, this could be a fantastic way to get into anamorphic photography with a level of convenience that wasn't available before. On a full frame camera though, I would only consider this, or mostly consider this for video work if you can shoot in Super 35 mode or maybe occasionally in full frame mode. But purely for photography, I would probably wait rather for a 30mm version of this lens made for full frame, and hopefully this will come rather sooner than later. If you want to find out more how to use an anamorphic lens to fake basically a digital XPan, check out the video that I did earlier this year where I get into more detail how this whole thing works, the de-squeezing, everything. And thanks for watching. I will see you on the next one. Until then, auf Wiedersehen.